As you turn the corner, you see a monstrous green fire, roaring with almost bestial fury within an iron-spiked pit, casting a baleful light on the surrounding walls and the gibbets that hang from them. The light catches on ragged purple banners and crumbling stonework. The artifact you seek is in sight, but there appears to be nothing else in the room. What would you like to do? Hi guys, welcome to the archive. This week I wanted to build something for those among you who like those smaller builds, those quick wins that make a big impact on the table. I am still working on the rest of the modular building system I've been showing recently, but I found myself inspired while I was reading through Morden Cairn's Tome of Foes and thought the idea would be perfect for an easy quick build. I was browsing the Drow section and saw this really cool artwork showing off a large Drow cathedral, I think, with this sickening green light tainting the walls around it and really selling demon-worshipping nutjobs right off the bat. I wanted to make something a bit different to a torch though, something a bit bigger and more impactful, but still quick to make and useful in a lot of games. And modular. Because apparently I have a problem that I'm not quite ready to admit yet. I also wanted the build to be nice and quick, something that you could put together in an evening without it dragging on forever. You really don't need that much for this build. It's mostly made using household objects or basic hobby supplies that you probably have lying around somewhere. It does, however, use a flickering LED tea light if you want it to light up. But if you don't want to use that, or you can't get your hands on one, you can easily paint the flame however you'd like. One of the really cool things about it is that you can remove the spikes, as well as change the colour of the fire by making a second fire piece later on if you wanted to. This allows you to use this piece for a ton of different environments, not just demon worshipping nutjobs. I found it was best to start with the piece that needs drying time so that you can go back to it while you're finishing up the other stuff. The fire is mostly made from hot glue, but to make sure it was as transparent as possible and not too cloudy, as well as to make sure the LED would fit inside, I made a quick framework from plastic packaging. All you need is a 2-inch square piece of plastic packaging. Fold and cut it diagonally. Do that again to that new piece, and then finally fold that final piece, but don't cut it. I used these with a bit of hot glue to slot together and make a nice pyramid. I then dribbled hot glue over the whole thing while it rested on a piece of parchment paper. A bit will pool at the bottom, but that's fine. We're going to use it to round out the triangle. The packaging might bend a little, but it shouldn't completely lose structure. While that's cooling, use a sharp knife or tool to pry open the bottom of a flickering LED tea light and prise the base off. This is pretty easy, but don't worry about damaging the plastic, it's going to be hidden anyway. Then grab a 2.5-inch square of foam, about 1/8 of an inch thick, and poke a hole in the middle for the LED light to poke through. If you keep this tight enough, the light should just get held in place by the foam, which also makes it a lot easier to remove later if it breaks or if you need to change the battery. If you ever find that this hole gets too wide, you can always add a little bit of foam to the bottom of the LED to make sure it's the right height. If you're finding this video useful, it would be awesome if you could like and subscribe, or even share the video to help me reach more people like you. Anyway, back to the point. Once the fire is dry, build up another layer on the flat edges and try and make it more of a rounded cone. If you're not happy with the shape, let it dry and then mould some more on top. If there's a bit that you don't like that's sticking out, melt it with the nozzle and sculpt it again until you're happier. Don't worry about sculpting flame effects yet, that comes next. Once it's dry, use the nozzle of the hot glue gun to melt and draw wibbly lines from the bottom to the top, sometimes merging them together. You'll want to melt down those triangle corners if you can, and make it even more rounded. Don't worry if it doesn't go to plan. The great thing about hot glue is you can just melt it and try again. Finally, it can be a good idea to use the nozzle on the bottom of the fire to melt any blobs on the underside and check it's nice and flat when you're all done. Once you've got your fire shape, I checked there were no loose strings of hot glue and did the next stage while building the rest of the pit. Cover the whole thing in brush-on gloss varnish, and when that's dry, coat the whole thing in layer after layer of wash in whatever colour you want the pit to be. How many layers this will take depends on how yellow the light from your LED is. You'll want to grab one that's as white as possible if you can. What can also help is blue tacking the fire upside down on something so that the wash flows to the top and darkens it, which makes it look a little bit more like smoky fire. You don't have to do this though. While that's drying, we can finish off the pit. You want to grab 4 columns of foam about ½ an inch thick on 2 sides. You want 2 of them to be about 2.5 inches long and the other 2 to be 1.5 inches long. Hot glue them together as a square and trim the outer edges a little bit with a knife. Then texture that thin square of foam with the LED hole on one side and glue it to the top. You'll want to aim to keep the glue away from the corners so that we can cut them later. Then you want to grab 4 planks that are the same as the first 4, but a 1/4 inch high instead, and glue them on top, aiming to keep the glue away from the corners again. Then we just need to cut the corners off. This doesn't have to be a perfect 45-degree angle, but if you have something that you can measure that with, it'll look a bit more symmetrical. If you want, with the leftovers, you can glue them in on the inside, but it's probably a good idea to check that your fire will still fit first. Just to mention as well, if you like the channel and would like to see more in future, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. It's through the generous support of these genuinely nice people that I'm able to afford to continue the channel and hopefully make it better. Now it's mostly built, we just need to bevel the edges with a ballpoint pen and carve bricks into the sides with a knife, before beveling them too and texturing them as stone with balled up tinfoil. If you want to know more about this technique, check out some of my earlier videos. Finally, I cut some cocktail sticks down to 1 inch long and carved chunks out of them before punching little holes for them and wedging them into the corners. You can easily glue these in, but I chose not to so I can remove them if I want the fire to be a bit less evil. You can always tighten up the holes with some dabs of Mod Podge if you find they come a little bit loose. All there is left to do then is paint it, which I would probably do without the LED attached. I started with a sealing coat of Mod Podge and the base colour, which in this case is some tan acrylic paint. This coat should be fully covered up by future coats, so don't worry if you can see through it a little bit. It's a lot easier to layer up to a flat tan colour from pretty much almost anything other than black, so this saves a few steps. Once the sealing coat is on, I added another layer of pure tan paint to finish the job, making sure I got into all the cracks with a smaller brush. Once that was done, I used 2 50-50 mixed colours. One was a mix of neutral grey and white, and one was a mix of neutral grey and tan. I painted these on just under 1/3 of the bricks each, so there was still a few more tan bricks showing than any of the other colours. Once that was done, I dry brushed both colours with tan to tie them together, dry brushing from top to bottom where possible to give a nice lighting effect. And I then dry brushed the stone again with white, this time being much more delicate with it, but still making sure it caught the raised areas. Finally, I gave the whole thing a coat of black-brown wash, the recipe for which is in my painting stone video, which is linked in the description. If you have some of Blackmagic Craft's wash, the new one with matte medium and ink, not the older one where it is just watered down paint, this is basically the same stuff. Other than the stone, the only extra bits are the spikes, which I painted with a sealing coat of black and Mod Podge, followed by a coat of dark metallic paint, in this case gunmetal, gave them a black wash and then finished up with some splashes of blood for the blood god. I found it was a lot easier to paint these on a little blue tack mount like this, which keeps them from getting paint everywhere. If you do need any tools or supplies for this build, you can find links to everything on my equipment list, which is linked in the description below. If you do buy from this list, some of the links are affiliate links, which help support the channel without costing you a penny. Finally, I gave the whole thing a coat of water-based matte varnish. The water-based bit is important, other kinds will melt the foam. You can find the stuff I use in my equipment list in the description, but if you can't get it, you can just use one brushed on, watered down Mod Podge. Now, if you're looking for the quickest of quick builds, you can just stop there. Coloured fire pit, complete. But you probably know what I'm like by now, I couldn't help adding another modular bit. It's a nice quick one though, so don't run away just yet if you think you don't have time. Basically, it's just some raised steps to put our flickering fire on. All I did here was take some 1/4 inch thick foam, a 5-inch square and a 4-inch square, and cut a 1-inch grid into them. Beveled, textured and painted just like the fire pit. Boom, stone platform. A great little piece of scatter that you can use with or without the fire itself. And that's it. An awesome little centerpiece you can build in an evening. I'm really happy with how this came out given how quick it was to build. It lets me completely change the atmosphere of a scene with just a colour swap on the fire and removing the spikes. I even realised I could use the stone part on its own as a small cistern or pool, especially if I just cut out a small piece of card or foam to fit and coat the top in 2-part epoxy resin or glossy Mod Podge. I wasn't perfectly happy with how the blue fire turned out, but it'll work just fine for my games with friends, and I think it's important to remember that not everything is going to turn out perfect every time, and that's okay. Also, if you like the little spiderweb Drow style banners, I've released them on the channel's Patreon page as a thank you to the guys who are helping support all of this, so please check that out, the link is in the description. I hope you enjoyed this build. Until next time, I'll be in the archive.